At midnight on December 31st, American citizens will ring in the new year with a number of new taxes. Now, that's when budget controls aimed at reducing America's fiscal deficit is set to take effect. Workers will see at least a 2% increase in taxes as temporary payroll tax cuts expire. Many tax breaks for businesses will also disappear. And just as tax breaks disappear, new taxes will be levied to fund the new health care plan. And as citizens find themselves paying more taxes, the government will also be spending less, all in an attempt to cut the gigantic amount of debt the United States has amassed. $16 trillion to be exact, and more than the country's 2011 GDP, which sat about $15.8 trillion. Now, while the government has no choice but to cut its ever-rising deficit, the combination of increased taxes and government spending cuts are more than enough to drive America's already fragile economy back into a recession. Now, this is the difficult conundrum that has been dubbed the fiscal cliff. Now, many have proposed ways to deal with America's financial conundrum, but none have been quite as novel as an idea proposed by Stephen Mufson, a reporter at the Washington Post. To address America's debt problem, Mufson suggested that the federal government sell Alaska. According to Mufson's personal estimates, putting Alaska on the auction block will bring in at least $2.5 trillion. Alaska, the United States' 49th state, is home to nearly 4 billion barrels of proved oil reserves and 9 trillion cubic feet of proved natural gas reserves, according to the Energy Information Administration. Now, back in the 80s, a Stanford University economist estimated the value of Alaska's oil and gas reserves at $200 billion. Long before new resources were discovered and at a time when a barrel of oil sold for 1/3 of today's prices. Now, in addition to oil and gas, Alaska is also home to more than $300 billion worth of precious and semi-precious metals, not to mention forests and lakes filled with lumber and fish. In 1867, the U.S. bought Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. But who will put up a bid for Alaska this time? Mufson suggests that Beijing is one possible candidate. China, hungry for natural resources to feed its surging economy, might jump at the idea of buying such a resource-rich territory. And China, Mufson suggests, could also resettle some of its giant population to the sparsely inhabited territory. But the best part of the transaction may be that a monetary exchange would not even be necessary. China currently holds over $1 trillion in U.S. debt, or about 1/4 of the total $5.2 trillion of U.S. debt held by foreign countries. Thus, if the price is right, China could simply buy Alaska by trading in the U.S. Treasury notes it holds. Now, over to Weibo to see what net users think about the prospect of China buying Alaska.
Buy it, no matter what the price. Then we can build houses. Even if the price was $1 trillion, we could still break even. This is worth considering. We don't even need the government to come up with the money. We can just find some people willing to pool their money. It's certainly better than buying US government debt. After we buy it, we should set up a Chinese language test like the TEFL. People who cannot pass the test will not be allowed into the territory. Finally, a new way to settle all the money the US owes China. Maybe each Chinese person can contribute 1 yuan. Actually, China can acquire it simply by eliminating the US Treasury bonds it currently holds.
But whether it's trading in Treasury bonds or handing over cold hard cash, some Weibo users were skeptical that buying Alaska was such a good deal after all.
Don't buy it. It's a trick. Once China buys the land, the Americans might incite a separatist movement. Then, without spending a single dime, the Americans will get Alaska back. Definitely not dependable. The Americans won't even let the Chinese buy their businesses, let alone their territory. Also, the president probably doesn't want to be labeled as a traitor. It will be hard to govern the land after it is bought. I think it will be a money-losing deal. It's so far. It will be a burden for China to own the land.
Well, there you have it. Those that think Beijing should be first in line to acquire new land, and those that think the venture is ultimately a bad deal. No matter how the U.S. decides to address the upcoming fiscal cliff, there is no arguing that China, along with its reserve of treasury notes, will be watching intently.